Hello, everybody, and welcome to the IRM UK Enterprise Architecture and Business Process Management Conference 2020. My name is Nedim Dedic, and today I'll try to present an approach on how to establish enterprise architecture as a well-accepted, recognized, and relevant discipline in any organization. Before I start with the formal part of presentation, I would like to shortly introduce myself. As I already said, my name is Nedim Dedic, and I work as a lead enterprise architect at Salzburg AG. Salzburg AG is a multi-utility company and the biggest energy supplier in the state of Salzburg. It's located in the city of Salzburg, in the beautiful city of Salzburg in Republic of Austria. What I do at this company as a lead enterprise architect is my responsibility the company's competitiveness by maximizing the utilization of digital resources, by aligning information technology with business needs, and through optimizing and digitalizing the business processes. It's my responsibility as well to enable fact-based strategic and tactical decision-making at top management levels. What will I be talking today? I will speak about several aspects of enterprise architecture, such as acceptance, recognition, inclusion, and relevance. So, from perspective of documentation, from perspective or in the context of the concept documentation, I'll try to explain where we need to focus. When we speak about enterprise architecture. From the perspective of standards, I will try to explain what is the proper way of using the standards in the scope of enterprise architecture. From this perspective of enterprise architect, I'll try to explain how to live enterprise architecture as a team sport. From the perspective of integration of enterprise architecture activities into existing operational processes, I'll try to present the proper way or optimal way on how to integrate those processes, enterprise architecture processes, into organizational processes. From legal perspective, I'll try to present the way how to make the laws where they don't exist. So, and from perspective of formality, I'll try to explain why it's important not to be bureaucratic when it's about enterprise architecture, and why it's important to focus on helping the business. So let us start. Many enterprise architects. I have been working in enterprise architecture for about 10 years. I met huge amount of the people, huge amount of architects, from solution architects, domain architects, enterprise architects, IT enterprise architects, and different kind of architects, business architects, etc., etc. So, however, quite large, amazingly, quite large number of them argue that there is a need to document everything that might be relevant for enterprise architecture prior being able to actually start solving real business problems. So the idea is to deliver the best of enterprise architecture. The idea in that concept is to deliver the best of enterprise architecture. We should document everything what might be relevant for enterprise architecture, including every single attribute for enterprise architecture object. From my point of view, that's quite nice idea. However, trying to document everything, it's a huge amount of work. So it will take several years to do something like that. So that basically indicates you cannot start delivering with enterprise architecture immediately. So you will have to wait a couple of years to see the first effect of enterprise architecture, or business will see the first effects of enterprise architecture only in several years. It can also be extremely exhausting. So for the people working with enterprise architecture, for the people working in business, can you imagine the situation where you go to the business department and tell them that you want to document a specific process, including applications that support that process, technologies, people, roles, infrastructure, etc., etc. It can be quite exhausting if it's about one complex process. It can be quite exhausting, to be honest, at least from my experience. As I already said, trying to document everything that might be relevant for enterprise architecture may take several years to complete, which is basically a situation where we do not where the business has to wait a couple of years to see the positive effects of enterprise architecturally. And at the beginning, when we are speaking about trying to document everything, what might be relevant for enterprise architecture, it is a process that functionally has no end. The biggest problems with this approach, so the biggest problem with this point of view is that it does not have immediate benefits for the business. And of course, in that situation, it would be quite hard to establish enterprise architecture as an accepted organization or as accepted organizational part from the very beginning. So, as I already said, it's great to have a company-wide enterprise architecture strategy framework or architecture model. So it's great to have a company-wide. It's great to have a concept that includes the whole company, holistic concept of enterprise architecture. On the other side, documentation is also good. So, and in most situations, it can be quite helpful. So, but the question is, do we really need to document everything to start helping the business? So, from my point of view, from my experience, no, we don't really need to document everything to start helping the business. So at the beginning, we should concentrate. So when we speak about enterprise architecture documentation, we should always concentrate only on what you need in a certain situation, and we should focus on helping the business to find optimal solution for their current challenge. So regardless, do we have any documentation or not? So what is the idea here? So the idea here is actually to try to help the business from the very beginning, even with no documentation at all. So the idea is to help the business. So in such way, the business will immediately see and recognize the benefits and the benefits of enterprise architecture, and the enterprise architecture would help the business from the very beginning. If we follow this approach, as I said, we're going to help the business from the very beginning, and enterprise architecture will be recognized as important, helpful part of the organization from the very beginning. So this approach would help us to establish enterprise architecture as a functional, meaningful, a solution-oriented concept, and not just and not as a concept that is documentation-oriented, that's exhausting, etc. So, and at the end, sooner or later, we would achieve a decent portfolio of documented enterprise architecture artifacts that are documented, and we would be able to support fact-based decision making at strategic and tactical level with sufficient amount of information later on. So that's my message in the context of documentation. So we should always focus on the business needs and what we need the current situation. We should not focus on documenting everything that might be relevant for enterprise architecture, but only on that what can help the business immediately. When we follow this approach, as I said, sooner or later we achieve a decent portfolio of AR documented artifacts, which would then enable us to support fact-based decision making at any level in the organization. The second aspect I would like to talk about are the enterprise architecture standards. Standards are great. Everybody loves them, so even I. So they really help to optimally frame, to introduce, to establish, and to live enterprise architecture and any other concept. So when you have nothing, so TOGAF, for example, TOGAF and its ADM could be great to help to establish and to organize enterprise architecture when you have nothing, when you have no idea where to start. So argument of the other, on the other side is a good basis to organize and standardize enterprise architecture elements to have an idea, to get an idea, for example, what might be relevant, what enterprise architecture objects might be relevant for your architecture. However, when we are speaking about enterprise architecture standards, we have to be careful. We have to be really, really careful. So we should always, when we use standards, we should use them, of course, but we should not focus on meeting the requirements of the standards. That's really, really wrong. That's really wrong. So standards, from my perspective and from my experience, should be used as a help to meet the requirements of the business. So AI organizations that focus on too much on following the AI standards might fall into the requirements of the standard as their main job. I've experienced myself, and I witnessed to many situations where the fulfilling the requirements of the standards or meeting the requirements of the standards became the main job of enterprise architecture organizational units. So instead of focusing on helping business, instead of focusing being agile and being supported, enterprise architects and the other architects focused extremely on fulfilling the requirements of specific business, and that's simply wrong. Enterprise architecture does not exist to support the standards. Enterprise architecture exists to support the business. So so as I already said, so enterprise architecture is not there for the sake of meeting the standards requirements. So we shouldn't be the slave. We shouldn't be the slaves of the standards by any means. So we should follow them, but not blindly. So meaning, if you find something useful or something interesting or something which we can functionally apply in specific standard, we should use it. But however, we should not fall into the situation where we blindly follow the standards. That would be my message. That would be my message from the perspective of enterprise architecture standards. So I would also like to speak a little bit about how do enterprise architects see the enterprise architecture and the concept of enterprise architecture. So, contrary to popular belief, of many, I would say of many enterprise architecture is not just about enterprise architects and about architects and how they see the world. You know, enterprise architecture is any other concept in the company. It's a team sport. Everybody needs to be included. Every single relevant stakeholder needs to be included in the process of enterprise architecture in enterprise architecture. So we should include the people in enterprise architecture story even before establishing enterprise architecture, during the enterprise architecture establishment, and in all AR processes and activities which might be relevant for enterprise architecture. For example, how can we include people into enterprise architecture even before establishing enterprise architecture? Simple example from my experience. So, for example, when I tried to establish enterprise architecture in one company, what I did is I went to every single player, every single decision maker in departments and spoke with them about their issues, their problems, and their challenges, the challenges and issues and the problems they are facing every day in their everyday activities. So what I done then, I converted those challenges, those problems to specific metrics or to specific metrics that I then used as a benchmarking criteria when I was selecting enterprise architecture tool. So basically, I had the problems I converted those problems into the metrics, and I use those metrics actually as a criteria to select appropriate enterprise architecture tool. So also, for example, during establishment of enterprise architecture, I involved almost the whole company. So every single relevant person could give his or her opinion about what we need in enterprise architecture and what perspective of enterprise architecture do we need to consider in the concept of enterprise architecture. So by establishing domains, functional domains, by establishing business domains, by establishing, I don't know, by defining what enterprise architecture elements do we actually need. For example, do I need when I'm trying to document specific processes, do I need to document only application, or do I need application components, application groups, technologies? Do I need data objects, etc., etc., etc. So, and of course, at the end, you have to include the people, relevant people, into when you establish enterprise architecture. You need to include the people into established into the processes and activities of enterprise architecture that you already established. For example, if you included enterprise architecture in a specific organizational process, then you really need to include the people in that process. I'll show one example later on in my presentation how I included huge amount of relevant stakeholders into the process of enterprise architecture. So that is basically everything what I can say about how to look on enterprise architecture, and as I already said, enterprise architecture is not one-man show, it is a team sport. What I would like to speak now is basically on the importance of integrating enterprise architecture processes into existing organizational processes. Well, into existing organizational processes. It's not sufficient only that we speak about enterprise architecture. So it's not as well sufficient to have enterprise architecture processes that are separated from existing enterprise architecture processes and then that are only done or executed by appropriate or relevant architects. So we must integrate enterprise architecture activities into existing organizational processes, and we must develop appropriate enterprise architecture fusion processes. So the best way is actually to integrate enterprise architecture activities into existing organizational processes. From my perspective, from my experience, the best way is to develop appropriate enterprise architecture fusion processes. So what is an enterprise architecture fusion process? So enterprise architecture fusion process is the process where we consider what effects does a new solutions has on existing enterprise architecture infrastructure. For example, do we have enterprise architecture process should allow us actually to identify do we have any solutions in the house when we for example from IT perspectives when we are trying to conduct or execute a specific enterprise architecture process in the context of IT, enterprise architecture fusion process would allow us to identify do we have, for example, any existing application that might fulfill the needs of the business, or do we have any existing solution that we could extend? It would allow us as well to check how does the new proposed solution fits into how does new proposed solution fit into existing infrastructure. So it's quite important to integrate. So enterprise architecture activities into existing processes. And one of the ways on how to do it is I presented one of the ways how to do this in my paper, a methodology to include and to integrate enterprise architecture processes into existing operational processes. If you want me to share this paper, I'm quite willing to do so. The process I developed is shown on this presentation and has 5 phases. The first phase is to define the scope of enterprise architecture interest. The second phase is to identify existing operational processes. The third phase is to design needed enterprise architecture processes. Fourth phase is the functional integration, and the fifth phase is establishing legal basis to enforce the use of enterprise architecture. It sounds quite simple, but it's a quite complex activity, and I do invite anybody to read the paper and to consider this approach when trying to integrate AI activities into existing processes. So, but probably the biggest and the most the most important aspects of integrating enterprise architecture activities and processes into existing operational activities and processes is developing appropriate enterprise architecture fusion process. So what I mean, for example, if you have the demand process in your company and this demand process and you use this demand process to acquire new solutions and new applications and anything new in your company, you could include enterprise architecture in this. You could include enterprise architecture fusion process as a part of this process. For example, you can see on the presentation a small screenshot or a small cut off from my enterprise architecture fusion. This is another paper that will be published soon in Journal of Information and Organizational Sciences. However, anybody who has interest, I can send them this paper, and this paper basically describes the whole enterprise architecture fusion process. So in this enterprise architecture fusion process, for example, if you get some sort of demand for a new enterprise architecture object, enterprise architecture object can be process, can be value stream, can be application, technology element, infrastructure element, data object, etc. You trigger if you get a requirement for one enterprise architecture object. For such enterprise architecture object, then you actually trigger enterprise architecture fusion process, which starts with key stakeholder certification, initial coordination meeting. After initial coordination meetings, you should round off and tune the business requirements. You should identify, for example, knockout criteria, important functionalities, nice to have functionalities, and you should form some kind of solution architecture vision. You will use those knockout criteria, important functionalities, and nice to have functionalities later on, in the case that you start with the solution selection process, etc. And enterprise architecture fusion process, it covers as well baseline architecture, future architecture analysis, gap analyzing, finalizing solution concept, etc. So, however, what I'm trying to say, it's when you have this process included into existing operational processes, then you achieve a state where enterprise architecture is fully accepted. For example, you should have form of enterprise architecture check in demand process where you integrate. You should have a form of check of enterprise architecture fusion process in the scope of demand process, where one important or large part of demand process is enterprise architecture fusion process itself, and only when this enterprise architecture fusion process is conducted and when you have appropriate solution or appropriate result of the enterprise architecture fusion process, you should only in that case continue with the demand process. So you deliver information to technical guys or to business departments what they need to do next. So do they need to acquire new solution? Do they need to introduce a new process? Do they need to extend existing process, existing solution? Do we need new server, new technology, anything else in that case? So, as I already said, it's quite important not only to speak about enterprise architecture, it's extremely important to integrate enterprise architecture activities into existing operational processes and activities. You can do that by developing appropriate enterprise architecture fusion process and integrating such process with demand process. For those that have interest, I can deliver the both papers. Just send me email or message, and I'll do that, and I'll do so. And that would be basically everything about on integrating enterprise architecture processes into existing organizational processes. How many times do we have? Okay, great. What I would like to speak now shortly is and this is probably the most important aspect of the presentation, and this is probably the most important aspect of the presentation. From my perspective, most of the higher management recognize the well-established enterprise architecture as a crucial aspect for successful digitalization, especially for large enterprises and including middle-sized enterprises as well that have complex digital infrastructure and processes. So, however, according to my research and according to my opinion, and according to feedback of hundreds and hundreds architects, even today, the biggest challenge of the most enterprise architects is to make and establish enterprise architecture as accepted and recognize discipline at operational level in their organization. So why is that so? I think there are two aspects. So one aspect is strategic and tactical nature of enterprise architecture. And the second aspect is absence of formal legislation or legal framework. So what I mean when I say absence of formal legislation or legal framework, when you build a building, when you build a complex building, when you build a road, then there are some rules and laws and regulations that needs to be followed, and you cannot build the road, you cannot build the house without approval or sign off by relevant architect or similar. So, however, this is not the case. IT and enterprise architecture as well. IT, enterprise architecture, and enterprise architecture are quite young. Are quite young disciplines. So, in the most cases, in most countries of the world, enterprise architecture is not regulated. So, IT environment in any kind of company is not legally regulated, and that's what I mean when I say absence of formal legislation or legal framework, which makes it hard for enterprise architects as well, and for architects, solution architects, domain architects, to establish enterprise architecture as recognized and accepted organization. So, how can we cope with those two perspectives? So, strategic and tactical nature of enterprise architecture and absence of legal legislation. First one is we have to speak with people at operational level. We have to deliver them appropriate enterprise architecture tool that they can use in everyday activities that would help them actually to do their job. We can do that by delivering appropriate diagrams, by delivering appropriate information about solutions, etc. And how can we cope with the situation how can we cope with the situation where with the perspective absence of formal legislation of legal framework? So, and this is quite important. So what can we do? What can we do then in that concept? So if there is no law, if there is no any regulation, we can always introduce or try to introduce bylaws or other form of internal regulation. What I mean here is we can try to introduce a legally binding regulation at organizational levels. It doesn't have to be law; it can be an organizational level. So, and this regulation could help us actually to establish enterprise architecture at operational level. So what I here mean, so I mean we can have some form of regulation signed off by the management that says actually that introducing or establishing any new enterprise architecture in the company, and any new object or any new solution in the company that we consider as enterprise architecture object in the context of enterprise architecture has to go through enterprise architecture check. In that check, basically we establish which effects has a new proposed solution on enterprise architecture, what we need to consider, how does it relate to other objects, do we have everything in the company that might replace or that might fulfill the requirements of that might fulfill the requirements of proposed solutions, etc., etc. The content of regulation should be a simple statement that says that for every introduction of a new enterprise architecture, as I said, an obligatory enterprise architecture check needs to be conducted. We can say that we can conduct this enterprise architecture check in the scope of demand management process. We should describe as well what is meant under the AR check and why do we need it. So it should be what is important. This regulation should be agreed with heads of relevant business units. You have to go to every single manager of the specific business unit and speak about them and then try to find a common understanding of regulation. So, and it should be, of course, at the end signed by them and by CEO. So, at the end of the process, every relevant employee should be informed about the new regulation. From my experience, this is immense help actually to establish enterprise architecture as recognized and accepted organization as end concept at operational level. So the challenges that I had on operational levels, at operational level, solved actually with the regulation that are introduced in my company. So I do propose everybody to introduce similar regulation at organizational level. So, and it will definitely help to establish enterprise architecture at that level. So, however, you have to be very careful with previous step. It can be quite dangerous. So, because a new regulation must not be a new regulation could become so another bureaucratic obstacle. So, and it must not become so another bureaucratic obstacle. So we are really on track after some time, and when we see it's quite good established, it's quite good accepted. We would have a situation where some architects use that regulation actually to introduce a more bureaucracy in the company, and we have to stop that. So we should not allow that something like that happen. So we must never forget actually. So enterprise architecture, for example, when we speak about acquiring new solution, new enterprise architecture element, enterprise architecture is not there to say yes or no. So enterprise architecture is there to help the business to overcome the obstacles when they occur. And in that context, we are there to find acceptable solutions that work for the most stakeholders. Enterprise architects, and that's probably the most important message from me today. Enterprise architects should not put themselves in the position of gatekeepers that either reject or approve. But we should put ourselves in the position of gate helper that always try to find a way in fulfilling the requirements to get through the gate. What I mean here, if somebody comes to us with a specific requirements, we have defined our principles, we have defined our regulations, and we have defined the scope in which new solutions should move. So when somebody comes with an idea for a solution that does not fulfill, that does not comply with our enterprise architecture framework or our regulation or our architect or our principles, we should not say no, it does not fit in. We should try to find a way what we need to do to make that solution, to make that proposed solution to fit in. So basically, we should always try to help the people, and we should always try to help the business. We should always try to help the business to make their solutions, make their proposals fitting in with our enterprise architecture. So it's not our job to say yes or no. It's our job to try to find acceptable solution that work for the most of us. We are there to help to overcome the obstacles for the business when they occur. And that's basically everything what I have presented in my presentation, what I have planned for my presentation today. You are free to ask the questions. For those willing to connect, you can do it via email or via my LinkedIn profile. You can find contact information here. Thank you once again for taking a part in my presentation. Thank you once again for being here, and I do hope you will enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.